Years and years ago, I volunteered to do some local Forest Service work when one day, I was 17 or 18 years old at the time. I was asked to clear some thicker brush in this remote area for trail development. Because we had so little volunteers, I was the only one working this shift this day. I was by myself entirely. Because of my youth, I was very arrogant and sure of myself and my surroundings. How wrong I was. I hadn't even been clearing the brush for more than an hour when I started to see the tops of these large ears in the trees near me. These massive pointed ears that were bigger than any ears I'd ever seen. Then, whatever it was looked up at me through and behind the trees. I just saw these glowing yellow eyes looking back at me. From where I was standing, whatever I was looking at appeared to be well over 6 feet tall. The eyes were almost hypnotic. It was almost like you got sucked into them. They pierced into my soul. I felt as if the energy from the eyes hit me, and I felt a pull to run towards them. Like I was being lured away from my task to come towards whatever these eyes were attached to. I felt like I was in a trance, being controlled like a puppet to a puppeteer. I found myself almost beginning to walk towards them and not realize it before I snapped out of it and turned away. In that moment, I felt the gripping trance on me had faded and just felt total fear. So much so that I was too afraid to move. I regained control and turned and ran as fast as I could to go tell my supervisor what was going on. I ran back to the main part of the trail, which in the area I was in was a dead end, when I began hearing something really big following close behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. That's when I heard a howl yell sound. It was powerful enough that I actually felt it, as if I was made of metal, and if I moved, I would have been destroyed. It felt very close, and I could feel the presence of something approaching me from behind. I turned around to see what it was, and there, just having stepped out of the woods behind me, stood a monstrosity of a being. It was taller than a man, had a larger head than I imagined, and the most evil-looking eyes. It was the same creature that tried to lure me away, and it didn't look remotely happy that I broke free from its trance. It followed me up this trail and just looked so angry that I didn't come to it. It had long upright ears, just like what I saw initially behind the trees, hands with long claws, and a face almost like a wolf but uglier, if that makes any sense. I knew I was now fully seeing this thing in the flesh, whatever it was that was masked behind the trees trying to pull me in. This was the creature. It stood there, looking me up, sizing me up, eyes scanning my body up and down, as if waiting for me to make the next move, when this thing takes a step towards me. And just in that very moment, I hear the sound of somebody coming towards me. My supervisor in a golf cart. She was coming down the trail and headed this way, just around the bend. This thing turns its immediate attention to the sound of the golf cart, and then turns and looks back at me, looks back again at the approaching sound, and then in a split second darts back into the woodline on the other side of the trail, creating a massive crashing sound. I pretty much soiled my pants, and not even 10 seconds later, my supervisor pops into view. She had this surprised look on her face to see me on this part of the trail, and even stopped to ask me what I was doing here, and why I wasn't down on the other part, finishing clearing the brush. I didn't say much, but I told her I think I needed to leave, and wasn't feeling well. I could tell she wasn't buying it, but she kept telling me, "Are you sure? You do look really pale. Are you sick?" Safe to say that I left and never volunteered for wildlife services ever again after that. One night, when I was around 10 years old, my dad came home late, about 11 p.m. at night. My mother, who had fallen asleep, was lying on the couch and waiting for him to get home. My dad, upon walking up to the house, noticed something looking at him by the side door of the house and the side window. When he turned on the light on the front porch, it quickly moved out of view. I shouldn't say turned on really. We have a motion light detector on the front porch, so when he stepped into view, this thing must have moved from the light. My dad, being on high alert, thinking it was an intruder coming into the house, and before he could say anything, my sister comes running down the hallway, white as a ghost, and said, "Dad, Mom, there's a large monster outside my window." Her bedroom window is on the far side of the house, right where the thing supposedly was. That is exactly where my dad saw it. My dad told us he was getting his rifle and grabbed it out of the closet. He opened up the back door and walked out into the darkness and screamed and fired off a shot into the sky, demanding whatever this was to show itself, or he was going to make it look like Swiss cheese. Incredibly corny, but my father gets this superhero complex about him sometimes, where I feel like he has to recite cheesy action movie lines just to quelch his fear. He shined his flashlight around, but couldn't see anything. My sister, my mom, and I were all on high alert, freaking out. My sister and dad genuinely saw something. While my dad was outside investigating the back, we heard something moving around the front yard. My mother somehow had the courage to look out in the window, and we saw it was not a person, but a large wolf-like creature that was staring right back at us through the window with these dirty, ambery yellow eyes. It looked emaciated and lifeless, sunken in face, and very slender, like it hadn't eaten in days. It looked kind of deformed and broken, but it didn't look like it was in any pain. My sister and I began to scream, and my mother rushed to the back to yell for my dad, saying it was in the front of the house. My dad comes rushing back into the house, all the way to the front of the house, and the damn thing is gone again. My sister and I ran and hid in my parents' room with a giant comforter underneath it, just like little kids. It was horrifying. My mom was freaking, and my dad probably spent the better half of the next 2 hours patrolling the entire perimeter of the outside of our house, searching for this creature, shining his flashlight at any given moment, pointing his gun. After a while, he gave up because we hadn't seen it anymore, and he went inside but kept the gun close by, just in case that it came back. He and my mom hardly slept, but they did sleep in the living room, or tried to. My sister and I fell asleep at some point, holding each other under the comforter. The following morning, and the time after, we just didn't talk about it, and I've never brought it back up as a family. My sister, however, kept asking my dad the next day, "What was that last night, Dad? What did we see? What kind of monster was that? Where did it come from?" My father refused to answer. My mom just kept changing the subject and suggested that we shouldn't discuss such things. We never had an experience like that ever, and we moved out about a year later. It's a scary memory to think back on, actually. Shortly after I had turned 21, I believe I saw a Dogman. After a long weekend of partying with some friends outside of Cincinnati, I don't remember the exact location, but it was along the highway near me, and probably right along the railroad tracks adjacent to it. It was on all fours, looking over at me, and then it stopped in its tracks. It seemed like it was looking directly into my eyes, but there was this overwhelming feeling when it looked at me, a fear that took hold of me. I couldn't break away from its gaze. It really did look grotesque looking. After about a few more seconds of looking at it, I determined that this was a creature of sinister intention, a Dogman. It was very humanoid looking in the face. I had to slow down to observe this thing as it stared back at me, like we were meant to make eye contact. Then I sped up, and this thing gave chase after my car. I was scared that it would catch up to me and pull me out of my vehicle, so I pressed on the gas hard until I was doing around 80 to 90 miles an hour, with this thing running behind me, nearly catching up with me. Then it just stops in the middle of the road, stands up on two legs, and then watches me as my car gets further and further away, creating more and more distance from this thing. I watched this all happen in my rearview mirror. Honestly, one of the freakiest things I've ever had happen to me in my entire life. I didn't know creatures like this even existed until I learned about Dogman later on in life. It's left a lasting impression on me. When friends joke about folklore and Bigfoot, I can't help but know now that there are things out there that do exist that society somehow deems as non-existent. Whenever I see creatures in the movies now, I kinda want to believe they exist, just like werewolves or dogmen. Call it whatever you want. Even with the faintest hint of a connection, I can't shake the feeling that this thing was trying to kill me. I was so scared that I still have this memory constantly. I've just accepted that it's a part of me now.